Virginia's Attorney General is waging a ruthless fight to block the possible resentencing of the D.C. sniper. This comes after Circuit Court decided to reopen the case of the man who helped kill 17 people with a sniper rifle when he was 17 years old. Joining me to talk about this is Molly Barrows, legal journalist for the Trial Lawyer magazine. Molly, you covered this story as a journalist,
You're right.
Years ago. What's your take on this?
It's interesting. It's a legal side effect, if you will, from the 2012 Supreme Court ruling that said juveniles need to be sentenced differently than adults, even if they're sentenced for murder, even if they've been convicted of murder. So in 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court made that decision retroactive, and so you're seeing a lot of defendants who'd been sentenced as juveniles now want to have those sentences vacated and brought back before the court to either be resentenced or maybe have their cases reevaluated. John Malvo is one of those.
Yeah, remind us about the facts here.
Yeah, so this is an interesting case. I remember back in 2002, there was such massive media coverage, October, during those D.C. sniper shootings is what they called them, and the attacks, and it covered Virginia and Maryland and the D.C. area. It was John Allen Muhammad, 41 at the time, and then 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo. And that's a sad backstory all the way around. Basically, the kid was manipulated by him, but they're still both responsible. They carried out these crimes. Their shooting spree even began months earlier in other parts of the country, and a tragedy all the way around. But they finally were captured after a massive manhunt. Muhammad was put to death for his crimes in 2009, and Malvo is now 33. He continues to serve, I think he was sentenced to a total of 10 life sentences, essentially. So this is where the Supreme Court's ruling comes in. He has had 4 of those sentences vacated in the state of Virginia, but in the state of Maryland, he's facing 6 life sentences without parole. And the judge there said, because the Supreme Court ruling said that it has to be a mandatory, that juveniles who were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole due to a mandatory sentence, those are the ones that are basically need to be vacated. So
what are attorney generals? It seems like they'd be very concerned about this because it creates a trend in their state.
Correct.
What are the attorney generals in these various states doing? Surely they want to block this.
Well, the Attorney General of Virginia is fighting for this. He's basically supporting the judge in Maryland who said, I'm not vacating his 6 life sentences without parole because our court had a choice at the time. Well, Malvo's attorneys argued, well, you didn't really have a choice. The only choice was, life in prison without parole or the death penalty, and we don't feel like that's a good enough choice. Whereas the federal appellate court in the Maryland circuit basically agreed that, yes, they should be vacated because we're going to uphold the Supreme Court's decision. But this Virginia Attorney General wants to take it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and have them assess whether or not these other sentences should be vacated in Virginia because they weren't necessarily mandatory, although so far the federal appellate court doesn't agree with that.
We make predictions on this show a lot. They lose at the Supreme Court level for some precedent that already has existed up there for some time. Thank you. We're going to follow this story. It's an interesting story as it develops.